Please be seated. Righteousness. It's hard to be good. It's hard to travel the straight path. Righteousness is defined as the straight path, the right path. The readings often are depicting the fact that people don't follow the right path. Joel was one of the minor prophets. When did he write? When was this occurring? He's referring to the fall of the temple, conquering of Jerusalem, which was 587. He's referring to the return from exile, which was in 537. And so they're thinking that this was written somewhere around 515 BC, before Christ. His name is interesting, Joel, which is in two parts. Jo, which means Yahweh, and El, which means God. And so it's Yahweh is God. Realize that in the world at that time, people worshiped many gods. They often didn't know the name of God, therefore they called him El, just a generic term for God. If you think of all the synagogues that you'll often drive by, it's sometimes called Temple Beth El, House of God. It was Moses who first learned, God's name. I am who I am. I am that I am. That he was a consummate source of being. A very difficult name, but nonetheless very descriptive when you think of the fact that God controls all being. Anyway, people have had a hard time for thousands of years following the right path. And you would think that the people would have learned from what they experienced through Moses, what they experienced through the kingdoms of David and Solomon, what they experienced from having lost those kingdoms to the Assyrians and Babylonians. But in the time of Joel, they still were not following the right path. And so, the prediction is that there could be a swarm of locusts. For those of us who don't know much about farming, the locusts would come out of the deserts of Africa, northern Africa, and they would fly over what is today Israel. And you would hear them coming by the flapping of their wings. And they would descend on a field that was usually a crop field. And at one point they said they could cover 1 square mile of the ground. And they would devour everything that was there. Everything. And people, because there were so many of thousands and thousands of them eating, you could hear this noise, as they're destroying all the crops. And so the prophets often were to describe the punishment of God as something rather physical, such as locusts, such as a famine, such as hunger. But really, the punishment of God is more spiritual. It is in terms of how we either grow or shrink by the choices we make. Paul is aware of that. This letter, second letter to Timothy, is written just before he is executed, just before he receives the execution of being beheaded. Normally he would have been crucified, but because he was a Roman citizen, he would be beheaded. They thought that was kinder because it was quick, as opposed to dying over a period of days. Paul is basically saying, I've run the good race. I have fought the fight. That's the way he pictures life, that you're tired from running the race. You're tired from fighting. But that's the way he thinks of it. It's been so hard for him to do the right thing, to walk the right path. And he knows that his blood will soon be spilled. Just as in many sacrifices in temples, they would pour out blood of an animal as an offering to God. His blood would be poured out as his offering to Christ. And he is glad to make that because he knows that he goes from this life, which is full of suffering, to a life where there is no suffering, where he will be perfectly happy. The gospel reading gives another example. And it's an important example in that it is often confusing as to who is walking the right path. And so we have these different people, Pharisee, tax collector. The Pharisees developed as a party, they were lay people, developed as a party after the exile. And the word Pharisee means the separated ones. And they felt that because they had intermarried with Gentiles, because they had worshipped Gentile gods, this accounted for the fall of Israel and Judah. And therefore, the only way to remain safe is to remain separate. And they were very conscious of following the letter of the law. And so the Pharisee is proudly proclaiming, that he has given 1/10 of his money to the temple, a tithe. We ask us to do that in these days, but many of us don't. But 1/10, that's a significant amount of money from what you earn. And he also is saying, that he fasts properly, that he prays. People would pray twice a day, 9 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And so he's saying, I checked it off. Tithe, fasting, prayer, I'm righteous. And yet he is proudly proclaiming this so that everyone else can say, oh, what a wonderful person. Oh, we're so lucky to have him here at the temple. And in contrast is this tax collector. The tax collector was hated. The tax collector would show up at your door with 4 soldiers. If you could pay, no problem. If you couldn't pay, the 4 soldiers were there to haul you off to jail until someone in your family could cough up the money, no matter how much it would be. And you couldn't get out of jail until the money was paid. So, when you opened the door and saw a tax collector standing there, it wasn't like, oh, welcome. It was like they hated people who were tax collectors. They saw them as the scum of society. And often the tax collectors were allowed to even take more than what was owed, as sort of a little payment to them for taking on this job of being a tax collector. So, in other words, they'd come to you and you owed $1,000, well, they'd want $2,000. One that they would pocket and one that they would give. Now, however, this tax collector, and it's an interesting story because Matthew, one of the apostles, was a tax collector. And people thought there was a screw loose in Jesus for having chosen a tax collector as one of his apostles. But what he says is it's really what's inside a person that counts. It's not following just the letter of the law, it's following the spirit of the law. And this tax collector is genuinely sorry, is genuinely wanting to turn his life around. And Jesus says that's really what matters. And, it's hard for us to figure out who is genuine and who isn't. Many people today, this is Halloween, many people today wear masks. The mask of the workaholic, who I work so hard, therefore I'm important by the job I have. Or the narcissist who tells you, I live in a certain house, on a certain address, I drive a certain car, I go to vacations in a certain spot, obviously better than yours, therefore I'm better than you are. Well, God can see through the mask. Often we can't. And Jesus, who could see through the mask, is saying that the tax collector was not righteous, but the Pharisee was not righteous, but the tax collector was. Well, okay, we're all supposed to be righteous. What's the benefit of that? The benefit is not supposed to be that, you are better than other people, that you lord it over other people. The benefit is strictly to you, that to give is to receive. So what are some of the benefits of being righteous? Well, think, for example, of your love of family, your love of your partner, your spouse, your love of your children. You don't get any money from that, but if you think about it, it's what really makes you rich. When you have given liberally of yourself to someone else, and you have bonded with that person, and because you have opened up, because you don't have shallow conversations, but actually deep conversations, because you've given when you didn't have to give, you develop a very close bond. So close, that people who have been together for many, many years, when that partner or spouse dies, feel as if the world has just been whipped out from under them, as if their basis, is sort of gone. When you see, someone who's been married for 50 years, or had a partner for 50 years, and then all of a sudden they're gone. There's an emptiness that there's no way they can replace. Even if they remarry, how do you then live another 50 years with somebody else? So it's the benefit of having that deep, loving connection. If I said to you today, here's your choice. Your spouse can either die today, or I'll give you some money. Which would you pick? Well, some people say, well, how much? And I'm saying, but no matter how much it would be, it wouldn't be enough to balance out the loss of someone that important, someone that you love. So that deep connection through love is one of the benefits of being righteous. Another benefit is peace. That we know what life is all about. Life is not to live forever. Life is to learn how to love and grow and become more like Christ, and therefore more mature and more happy. We know also that when we die, we will live on in an afterlife where there will be no pain, no suffering. We will be in perfect happiness. Therefore, what do you have to be anxious about? Okay, someday you will die, but death is only a door to another life. And knowing that puts you at peace. No one can destroy you. No one can sort of rip out your soul, because that is where your strength is. Nothing can touch it. You're at peace. And therefore, in every service, we have the kiss of peace. Peace be with you. You too. It's not a time to visit with your neighbor. It's a time to remind your neighbor and yourself that you know what matters, and therefore you are at peace. Another gift in terms of being righteous is forgiveness. And I've talked about this before, but it's a powerful thought. Forgiveness, if you hurt me, forgiveness is not me being a wonderful man and forgiving you. It's based less on that and more on the fact that you, who hurt me, have the power to go and sin no more. And my forgiveness is giving you that opportunity if you blow that opportunity, that doesn't fall back on me, that I'm a fool to have forgiven you. It falls on you for not having taken that opportunity to grow. I'm not suffering because you didn't take the opportunity. You are. But I have grown by giving you the chance, by forgiving you and hoping that you will change. And, when people see you as a forgiving person, not someone who holds a grudge, someone who hasn't, you have an aunt or someone that haven't talked to her sister in 35 years because of something that happened when they were young. They've suffered because of that lack of forgiveness, as opposed to bonding again and growing together. Lastly, humility. Golf is a hard sport. I tell people I have two goals, friendship and humility when I play golf. And I easily accomplish both tasks. I can be doing so well, great drive, great second shot, I pitch up, and, I'm only 5 feet from the pin for a par, and I miss it! Or, I'm doing really well in a round, and all of a sudden I hit my ball, and it goes off to, I was laughing with people. I was in a tournament the other day, and we came to a hole where you have to hit over water to get onto the green. And over to the right, there's a tunnel that you have to go through to get to the next hole. And there's water in between where I was hitting and the green. And then over here is this tunnel. And I shanked the ball, and this is not a while back, but I shanked the ball, it goes across the water, into the tunnel, through the other side. Everybody, myself, started laughing because it was like the worst shot you could possibly make. And so, and I have to sort of say to myself, Peter, it's a game. Relax, okay? Your worth isn't based upon the fact that you can hit a golf ball straight. God is constantly there saying, "Oh, Peter, wake up, a little more humility, please." What is humility? Humility isn't eating humble pie. Humility is seeing yourself in relationship to God. Often when I'm playing golf, I will remind myself of that by simply looking up at the sky, at the beauty of creation, and realizing how small I am. Doesn't mean I shouldn't grow, but no matter how much I grow, I am nothing in comparison to God. God lives in eternity. I live in time. I will one day die. I am somewhat strong, but my strength will eventually fail. God is omnipotent, all-powerful. I am a very educated man with multiple degrees, but God is all-knowing, omniscient. I am someone who has a great imagination and can imagine being in various places. I've always wanted to go to Paris, but never been there, probably never will be there, but I can imagine it. I can see myself in different places. But God is in all places. I'm stuck in one. And this one is pretty nice, but it's still just one. And God is everywhere. So seeing those differences is what forces me to then bow my head and bend my knee, realizing that no matter how wonderful I get to be, I'm still pretty small in comparison to God. So not to get so puffed up that if I get to be spiritually fairly advanced, if I'm lording it over somebody else, well, I really haven't gotten to be that spiritually advanced. So I'm saying to you, Joel is saying that to you. Paul is saying that to you. Jesus is saying that to you. Walk the straight path. Why? Not because God wants you to do it, but because it is good for you. Because you will grow in love, in mercy, in peace, in humility by doing so. Amen.
Amen.